have one new face. Diane, are you new to this group?
I am, yes, the first week I've been able to join, so thank you.
Oh, great. Well, I'm glad this time works for you. Do you want to introduce yourself to the group?
Sure. My name's Diane Corey. I work for Critical Path Institute. I've been with them for about 11 years, and we are fairly new to OMOP. We've been doing some standardization at OMOP for close to 2 years now. So we get a ton of survey data from all over, from registries, from clinical trials, from EHR, from all over. So I am hoping to get a little bit of insight and help with how you folks would like us to map that survey data.
Awesome. Well, I'm so happy you're able to join us. Yeah, so I will say it's still kind of early days for us. So this is only the second year of our work group. So the last year we did a lot of kind of assessing what efforts were already out there and where the pain points were. And this year we're going to start trying to address some of those pain points. But that is a really good segue into talking about our objectives and key results for the year. So we ended up doing this via email as opposed to over a course of a couple meetings just because of some time crunch relative to some other restrictions we had. At the time, I wasn't sure I was going to be allowed to present them. So anyhow, let's go through those. What I'd like to do um, is decide on what of these things we think is the highest priority or lowest hanging fruit, and then maybe set some action items for moving forward. So let me get this pulled up. I'm gonna stop sharing first. Well, that worked. Yeah. Oh, I hate this. Okay, I'm gonna have to stop sharing to switch it over. Because you have to minimize everything on Macs before you move one run screen to another. Barney, no. Okay. Um, Makes it hard to share. All right. I'll go back to the first one. All right. So the first thing we talked about, and this came from discussion after we looked at things we've gotten in the landscape assessment, is looking at some of these smaller surveys that are used in clinical settings with the idea that because they're used in a clinical setting, that we'd likely be able to find the vocabulary we needed to map these, that it'd sort of be lower hanging fruit. So this is one of the things we talked about. One of the things, depending on the experience on the call, I would like to talk about is who, if anyone, has experience with any of these surveys and maybe make some recommendations for what clinical surveys might be a good fit. Um, Hi, Katie. We're just starting
Hello.
on reviewing the OKRs to set priorities. And I was just saying that one of our goals is to try to use the clinical surveys that are given in a clinical environment because they are clinical. It's likely we'll be able to find vocabulary for mapping them. And so just looking for suggestions from the team. I'll also sent out a general request um, for what would be a good choice of surveys. Are the clinical surveys that anybody on the call has experience with that we might be able to select as a starting point? All right. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next one. The next goal was just to enhance the community engagement and contribution. So I was hoping we would have more takers on the landscape survey than we did. We ultimately had about 10 people respond to it, including several people are in this group. It's still helpful and it's good to know the pain points, and some other people have reached out since to invite us to their groups to look at the work they're doing. But I would like to be able to kind of create a space where within our GitHub where people can share links and sorry, Kat, where people can share links and to their work or you share things out. And then I'm hoping at some point we'll have enough information that we could maybe do a workshop or a webinar, maybe at an annual meeting, something like that. So basically help people contribute what they're, what efforts, because we know people in working with survey data, it just hasn't been in a united way. So it would be great to have a place for that. The other ones I think are also, well, this one I also think is doable for this year, and I'm starting to do this. So I've been going to vocabulary work group meetings when I can. Some other work groups, like one of the African work groups, they're working with survey data. Psychiatry work group has come up as a potential good place because they also work with a lot of assessments, and see if we can align efforts and again share resources. So that's on my list to do. If there's anybody who would like to participate, we can, divide and conquer and get some collaboration going with these other work groups. The other two, I think, are a little bit further down the road. So we want to share out tools that we develop or find along this pathway. And then, as this is going to be a multi-year effort, and I don't think everyone on the call is game to do this themselves, at some point we're going to have to try to find some funding or other support for working through the mappings and things like that. So those are the OKRs. I do view these as multi-year OKRs. I don't think, with the exception of maybe the first two, I don't think we're going to check the others off the list this year. There'll be ongoing efforts. So any thoughts as to what you think should be the priorities? Any thoughts on clinical surveys that you're aware of? Any other comments? I see hand. Diane.
Yes, actually, I had a question on slide 5. I did see um, the I guess it was a survey of yours to kind of get information on what surveys people are using. A lot of the questions had to do, it made me feel like it was for people to respond that actually developed these surveys. And we don't develop surveys
Mm-hmm.
per se, but we do see a lot of different kinds. And I didn't know if we can contribute any information to this group that would be helpful and kind of how to organize that would be helpful to the group. I mean, like I said, we see them from different aspects, registries versus clinical trial data, um, versus some EHR, but we don't have any rights to it. We don't
Mm-hmm.
have, you know what I mean? We may get CRFs from some of our contributors, but we can't really share them if they're copyrighted. So I just didn't know what information would be helpful for this group because I'm more than willing to kind of dig through what we have and come up with some pain points or bullet points or best practices how we deal with things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just looking for some guidance, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So, one question for you before I answer. So, you're not implementing these questionnaires. You are just analyzing the data. Is that correct?
Right, but we
Okay.
also will put them up onto our platform for outside users to request. So we get
Okay.
DCAs from contributors that allow us to share the data with the public as long as they have requests that are okayed by our committee. So
Mm-hmm.
we need to then, somehow broadcast it to end users. We have started mapping some of those to OMOP.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've got SDTM and we also have some OMOP. So we've just been trying to figure out a way that we can um, map those survey questions to OMOP. Right now, it's really just our own custom concepts for most of
Mm-hmm.
them. Um, but
Yeah, and that
that's
seems
kind
to
of
be
the
what
overall.
everybody does. And that, so it'd be
Yeah.
nice. Yeah, and our goal is, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Well, let me circle back because I could go on. So back to your question. So yeah, what you do with the surveys is perfectly fine. We're looking for people who basically either had experience mapping to OMOP or were intending to map to OMOP. So it didn't so much matter, if you designed the survey, if you were the one implementing it, or if you're doing the analysis, or both. But just understanding, what you've done so far. Because again, like you said, a lot of times, like, all of us in UK Biobank and things have basically just used their own vocabulary. And so they end up having non-standard vocabulary that gets put into, oh, what is, Eddie, what am I thinking of? Atlas. Yes. That gets put into Atlas and they use it, but then it just kind of languishes there because people have concerns about mapping to non-standard data. And so one of our goals is to look at all these other vocabularies that have been created, figure out which ones um, fit our the most common or maybe our first round of use cases and start working with vocabulary to make these, standard for survey mapping. So knowing what you've done so far, looking at the vocabularies you've created and code and things you've worked on for doing the mapping OMOP would be really helpful. Because if we don't have to reinvent the wheel, that's awesome. Maybe we just need to get all the pieces of the wheel together in one place and then figure out some best practices or way to get synergy, for lack of a better word, across the different things people have done so that it turns into a tool or set of tools and vocabulary that everybody could use, right? Because what seems to happen now in these one-off efforts sort of defeats what OMOP is all about, and that's making, your data mappable to multiple networks. And so these one-off efforts are, as problematic as sort of doing it in a silo anyway. So we want to try to get away from that so that there are common elements across surveys so that we can get more surveys harmonized.
Makes complete sense. Yes.
Yeah, so we would love to hear from you in any format you'd like. So if you want to dig in and write it out, if you'd like to present to the group, that would also be very helpful. However you feel comfortable sharing out your experience.
Okay, great. I will put something together.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Hi, Monsi. I'm glad you were able to join us. We're just kind of trying to discuss some priorities for the coming year in terms of what we've set up for the OKRs. And I'm also kind of checking with the group to see what, if anybody has any experience with these clinical surveys, because we're thinking about starting with those because since they're used in clinical practice, they'll likely have elements that are already in OMOP because of the EHR data.
I've seen the SF-36 multiple times before and
Mhm.
PHQ-9. Um, I could dig into those a little bit as far as how we've been
Mhm.
given them, have them given to us. The other ones listed, not so much. I mean, I've heard of Promise, obviously, but not dug
Yeah.
into it too much.
I literally did a web search of clinical surveys to come up with some examples.
Yeah.
I will say Connect does do Promise, so that would probably be a good one to start. We just started giving that last fall. So that might be somewhere where I could contribute. Um, but yeah, so just I appreciate that, Diane. Anybody else who might have experience with these, or I'm also open to thoughts about how we can engage the community more. If there's what I'd like to see is sort of a community page on our wiki where people start putting links and then we can kind of collate. And as I said, I talked to one of the African working groups and they've been doing work with clinical surveys as well. I met with them last week and I'm following up. I'm trying to get a list from them of the surveys they've worked with because that would also be a good start. They have ETLs that they've done for these. And I think that would be very helpful.
Nicole, in regards to these surveys that you've listed here, these are very common things and they are well described in LOINC. Like
Mhm.
each question of the PHQ-9 has a particular link code, and I believe there's a link code for the composite score as well.
Oh,
And that's
great.
basically true for all of these commonly used ones.
Hmm.
And they are considered standard in, I'll just put a link to the Promise panel here in the chat.
Yeah.
They are
They are or
considered,
they aren't considered.
they are
Okay.
standard. These
Yeah.
most common ones, they're not necessarily mapped to something with clinical significance. Like if you have a positive PHQ-9, that doesn't get mapped to like depression or anything.
Hmm.
It's just a representation of the exact question and whatever response it was.
Okay. Well, that's sounds very good. Because yeah, if these are things we can map, then we could potentially produce, some standard mappings for these. That would be great. Thanks, Eddie. Eddie's working with Connect as our resident OMOP expert. So we're very happy to have Eddie on our team.
I have one other thought too. Diane
Sure.
was mentioning those copyrighted surveys, and you will find a lot of those in clinical
Hmm.
practice, especially with, like, in my experience, pediatrics. There's so many different surveys and questionnaires and things that peds physicians do at different points at a patient's life.
Hmm.
Like all of those are copyrighted. It would be very difficult to create mappings them in my experience because it's difficult just to get those things in Athena because the copyright holders don't want, their questions.
Uh, Interesting. Okay, that's good to know. So we'll have to figure that out. Yeah, I know there've been some, like they've been able to work, like SNOMED, they were able to get, even though that's proprietary. So there might be some things that can be done because but I get it. They only want you to see. So is the idea they only want you to see the questions if you've paid for access to the survey?
I think that's a part of it. They also don't want anybody administering the survey unless you've paid for it.
Okay.
You have the
Yeah.
question. You could.
So you have to worry about, now that's unfortunate. Okay. I understand, but it is annoying. But we'll have to, yeah, that's a good point. We'll have to pick and choose on those. Muncie? Oh, you're
Yeah,
still muted.
sorry.
Oh, there we go.
It might be obvious to everybody else, but I'm not, maybe it's something. So these questionnaires they're already standardized and they have sort of concept IDs or standards. So what are we going to map it to?
So
What is the mapping
yeah,
exercise?
so to OMOP vocabulary. So they're not necessarily, or to the full CDM. So they have students, but they're not necessarily part of OMOP at this point.
And do we need to are we going to try to map it to already sort of concept IDs that are
Yeah,
already in a mob, or and then create new ones if they're not there? Is that
yeah. I,
the
I think
exercise?
that ideally, and as Eddie shared about the link codes, ideally we think these are probably low hanging fruit to come up with some best practices for, because the vocabulary is likely already there,
Okay.
because of being used in a clinical setting. So
So it's purely
it's
mapping
sort
rather
of,
than
yeah.
creating. Yeah.
So
Okay.
this one be more about the mapping rather than having to figure out new vocabulary or doing, one-off vocabulary like's been done presently. So, when you kind of think of how like the steps to FAIR, it's sort of a similar thing. There's like incremental steps to getting more things in OMOP. So this is sort
Mm-hmm.
of a lower hanging fruit because the vocabulary should be there. So it should fit into the CDM. It's just a matter of, um, doing the actual mapping.
Yep. Yep. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? This is, yeah, this is earlier than we usually go, but at least it's a Tuesday and not a Monday.
Oh,
Go ahead.
hi, sorry. Thank for the link for Athena is great. And just occurred to me, we have a, a 1 year supplement right now where we're putting out a seventh survey in our California teacher study. And
Mm-hmm.
we just decided on content finalized in the last probably 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But and forgive me, I haven't done this before, but it looks like that Athena tool could be used then as my team is putting together the dictionary in the next probably month. Again, we want to match our existing CTS surveys, but if I'm understanding that tool correctly, we can go ahead and search that and grab all of the Odyssey descriptions and concept IDs and at least have some mapping for those, correct?
Yes, if you can do that from the onset, you will make your life a lot easier later on. If you can, as you're building your data dictionary, pre-map essentially your
Mhm.
questions and answers to concept IDs. There's another tool. So Athena is a great tool for finding these. There's also something called Usagi, which is traditionally what people would use to map a lot of these terms. I'll put a link in the chat. If you don't have very many, it might be easier to just do one by one in Athena, but Usagi is good if you have like hundreds of different or thousands of different terms.
That's more than we'll have, but
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I think the Athena one is good.
Yeah, that's great, Jim. I agree with. I keep seeing your name on the screen, so that's why I keep saying it. But yeah, I think I 100% agree with Eddie. I'm a big believer in pain on the front end saves you pain on the back end. And since you know this is a place you want to be, being able to do this with a new survey would be awesome. And selfishly speaking, it also benefits the group because then we have another survey example of where this is being done and
Along those
and how
lines,
you did it.
yeah, as I was looking at your OKRs and thinking about over the last year, there is kind of this uncertainty of how do we get started? How do existing studies like ours get started? And maybe, is there any benefit to having our current survey be sort of a use case and showing people that this is one of those low-hanging fruits when you're doing anything with the new questions, just go ahead and, as you said, pre-map, and that's a way to get started and reduce sort of the complexity or the intimidation of it.
Yeah, no, I love that idea. I think that's really good. And, I'm also a big fan of start where you are. And so you happen to be starting new. And so that's a great place to be. And then hopefully, as we get into the higher hanging fruit, we'll get to use cases that are more complex. But I think that's a really great place to start.
How about this? I'll talk with Kristen, who's been the lead on the overall project. I just want to give her a heads up before I commit, but I would love,
Yeah.
and I think she'll be open to it, to having this be more of a sort of a visual use case and an open use case that everybody can have a look at.
Yeah. And then another, hopefully a mutual benefit of that is then if if you're allowed to share that out as in progress, we can also get feedback, from the vocabulary group or from, the community in general, so I think that could be beneficial too.
Yeah.
Just Jim, we played around with Usagi a while ago. And like we've done some comparisons and working with Jaya from the data science group who presented at the Less Cohort Consortium meeting. So he one of the tools he's developing with ePharmony seems to perform better than Usagi in the analysis. So as you're working on that, it might be kind of great to sort of be one of the first people maybe to start working with ePharmony to do the mapping. It's
Yeah, and
it
Jaya presented to us on the 3rd. So there's a recording of that, Jim, if you want to see the tool.
Okay.
He keeps not releasing it because he's always tweaking with something. I think we're going to have to nudge him to just put it out there and get feedback. But if you want to see the presentation, yeah, that might be very helpful too for helping you find pairings between the survey and what's available in OMOB.
Excellent. Thanks. I'll take a look.
Yeah.
As an aside, if one delay we run into is we were funded in part to look at contemporary exposures. So we're going to ask about cannabis again. And our IRB has told us that we cannot ask about cannabis because some of our participants might live in states where it's illegal. And we're putting them at risk, which is completely naive. And it also ignores the fact that we know where people are based on their address, and we can repopulate based on what's legal or not legal. But of all of the things I expected to run into as a roadblock, this is not one.
Yeah, that surprises me because we have a pretty extensive cannabis section in the Connect exposure survey. And, you know, there are things we have, as the political environment has changed, we've certainly changed things where we're worried about, if anybody illegally got the data, what kind of problems it would cause for our participants. But cannabis has not been one of those. So, yeah, that surprises me. Although technically it still is a federal crime. Um, so, yeah, even if it's legal at the state level.
The National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, they do the NESARC survey, and they
There's a
ask
whole
extensively about drug use. So how do they get away with it then? And
legally,
that's
like,
federal.
yeah, everything we know about, for example, underage alcohol consumption, illegal drug use, all of those things are from similar surveys. So IRB is just 100% wrong.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if it helps to refer to other national surveys that use it. I'm pretty sure all of us has something in there as well. So yeah, that's
Yep.
unfortunate.
We're in the middle of the back and forth, but I think we'll survive.
Yeah. Good. Glad to hear it.
Thanks.
All right. Anything anyone else wants to share before we yeah, call it a day. Call it a meeting anyway. It's a little bit early to call it a day. All right. Well, I will let everybody get a half an hour or so back to your day. And yeah, Diane, whenever you're ready to share out what you put together, just let me know and I will get you on the agenda. I will look into maybe the possibility of working with Promise and also just kind of ask around a little bit about some other clinical examples. And then Jim, whenever you've got buy-in for doing this, let us know. And then we can talk about how we might be able to help you.
Thank you. Will do.
All right, great. All right. Well, hope everybody has a great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.